As part of an April Fool's joke this year, Relogic released the Terraria Undeluxe Edition on Steam, a re-release of Terraria 1.0.6.1 from August 2011. As many of you'll know, I've wanted Relogic to re-release old builds of the game for quite a few years now, and I do hope that this paves the way for future re-releases as well, with version 1.1, 1.2, even 1.3, which is now 9 years old. And today I want to show you my journey through this version of the game and share my experience playing such an old version of Terraria in 2024. But I also want to answer the question, is there any reason to play this version of the game that isn't simply nostalgia? Back in 2020, I played through that original version of Terraria, and for me, I don't hold a lot of nostalgia right now. So what motivates me to make it to the very end of this version of the game? Well, that's what I want to talk about. Here we are. Sweet nostalgia, version 1.0.6.1. As with every Terraria adventure, it begins by making a character, and as always, I have to pick hair free and set all the numbers to 255. Now, I opted for a medium world, even though back in the day, I always played with a small world, but it's because classic Terraria doesn't like to give you many chests. I play a lot of Terraria, so it's hard to get nostalgic, but nothing beats the feeling of generating a new world and seeing giant trees that are so tall they can't even be displayed on screen. I love these trees. One thing I noticed, which I didn't remember, is that items don't tend to go directly to your hotbar. Instead, they end up in your inventory. To start my adventure, I wanted to work on building a couple of homes so that we can get some NPCs. I think if you take the time to play this build of Terraria, the first thing you'll notice is how hard it is to actually build anything. Because you can't place out of inventory, all you do is throw items on the floor. It's a constant headache. To a console player, this is what it's like when a PC player picks up a controller for the first time to play Terraria. It just doesn't feel right. After building a house, I decided to go exploring, and to the left of the world is actually our corruption. So I decided maybe we're off right. One thing I found interesting is the slime bobbing on top of the water. When we played 1.0, I discovered that slimes would actually sink to the bottom, so I was very grateful that they bob around. Otherwise, we would have died here. After surviving the greatest battle in Terraria's history, I headed to the right and I was lucky enough to find a natural cave. Now, I know, of course, that worlds can generate in a variety of different shapes in 1.4.4, but I do love the nostalgia of a cave entrance that's carved into a giant mountain. It looks so cool. Now, this version of Terraria has a fair bit more content than the version that launched only 3 months prior. So that's why I was taking the time to grab cobwebs and also clay blocks, because in this version of Terraria, you do have a couple of vanity items, and you can also grow herbs and make potions. I do find it charming that in this version of the game, I spend as much time as possible gathering ores, and that's because if you do want a set of armor, they have some very steep crafting recipes. Now, I would say I am a Terraria veteran, a Terraria master, some would say, so I want to show you this absolute big brain maneuver. Here, my plan is to place some wood over this red slime so that I can get around it. Well, no, I'm just gonna, throw it out into the water. That's fine. I'll just bash it to death with a pickaxe instead. And because of the lighting being much darker, I couldn't tell how far up I was. So I was like, you know what? I'll ride the water down, and that way I won't take fall damage. Yeah, really big drop there, James. I'm really glad you did that. Well done. Now, it wouldn't be old school Terraria without just a random pillar of sand underground. Why did Terraria generate like this? And I do like that whether it's classic or it's modern, the very first weapon you've got to make is a wooden bow so that you can shoot enemies from a distance. Nothing changes. Another thing I didn't remember is how vivid it looks when an enemy is on fire. It really caught me off guard, but I actually think it's quite cool. So back on the surface, it was time to do some crafting. Now, I feel like we can all agree the main reason to play this version of Terraria is the furnace sprite. This version in particular added the sawmill and a bunch of new furniture, so I wanted to give that a go. Now, I'll be completely honest, this is the first time I have ever noticed that barrels are cheaper to make than chests. I guess it doesn't really matter in modern Terraria because you can find chests anywhere, but in classic Terraria, only requiring one bit of iron instead of two, game changer. I also thought I'd work on a second home and I wanted to get fancy with it, so I placed down a dresser and quickly realized that in this version of the game, you can't do anything with dressers. I did not remember that. Back in the caves then, I found my first chest, and inside was a shine potion and a blowpipe. I'd also found a Spelunker potion as well, and I want to quickly say I quite like how potions are handled in this version of the game. In this version of the game, potions are not given to the player as frequently as they are in modern Terraria, so they really feel like very short temporary upgrades to the player. One thing that's funny about playing old Terraria as a modern player is I do things I just never did back then. Like, I wanted some more, so I used a bomb and I blew it up. But when I was 14 playing this, because I played so much Minecraft, I thought bombs would destroy the items that you blew up. So I never used them back in the day. After that, I found our first gold chest, and it was brilliant. A band of regen, a summon for the Eye of Cthulhu, Spelunker potions as well. Perfect. The next chest I looted had a cloud in a bottle and also some more Spelunker potions. Genuinely, I don't think my luck can get any better. Oh wait, never mind. Angel statue. Yeah, it doesn't do anything. I even tried to place this down, forgetting the fact that, quite literally, it doesn't do anything. The last time I played Classic Terraria, Red actually revealed why the angel statue was added in the first place, and it was something like he'd spent a long time spriting it, so he didn't want to not put it in the game. I just love that, like, that's a Terraria fact now. I wanted to know that for years. I also found my first life crystal, and at this point, I was having such a great time. Like, I didn't even really think about the fact I was playing old Terraria. I just love exploring new worlds. Back on the surface then, I wanted to take a look at some crafting recipes, and one thing that was notorious about this version, jungle armor, is so grindy to make. So yeah, we won't be making that today. Now, I was taking a look at what you can make with rubies when I noticed something very interesting. Another thing which I did not remember. You can make a gold crown in this version, but you can't make the slimy crown. So at this point, there is no way to manually spawn King Slime. And on the far right of the world, I found our dungeon, and the nostalgia's very real. Although I did notice that it does look a little different than the design they used in the launch edition of the game. Now, even though it wasn't time for Skeletron, I wanted to get on it by building an arena just so when it came time to it, we were all prepared. I also thought I'd check out the ocean. Now, I don't mean to rinse Terraria, I am very sorry, but this is the exact same as it is now. So back at spawn, I decided to build 4 more rooms without realizing that by adding 4 more rooms to the 4 we already had, we actually have more rooms than NPCs in this version. Next up, it was time to explore the corruption, and it's cool to see that only a couple months after launch, the corruption feels like a completely different biome. The enemies feel better balanced, the chasms are not as much of a nightmare, and you also have the underground chasm. Yeah, that wasn't in the launch version. In this version of the game, you can't use bombs to break Ebonstone, but you can use dynamite. So that was a quick way to break a shadow orb if you didn't have purification powder. With a musket in hand and bullets from the arms dealer, I thought it was also time to check out the jungle. At this point, the surface jungle had been in the game for about 2 months, but because it didn't have a lot of enemies, I noticed that to make it the harder biome, the enemies just spawn way more. I did find it interesting that the path to the underground jungle was more like a cave entrance, whereas today it's more like a big drop. In the jungle, I found some gravitation potions, which I was quite excited to try out, but my adventure there didn't last long. Yeah, the jungle absolutely wrecked me. This was the first death so far. Gravitation potions are the nostalgia I didn't know I needed, because instead of like flipping the world, you just walk on the sky. I don't know, it's so charming. And I will say, a sky island without cloud block also looks really cool. The chest inside does require a gold key, and I will say, I actually think this might be better. Back in the caves then, I found a set of Hermes boots, and with a cloud in a bottle, Hermes boots and a band of regen, this is about as powerful as you can be in this version. And since I was down there, I thought I would take a quick trip to hell. Now here's something I really did not remember. Guide voodoo dolls were in the game before the Wall of Flesh. I have no idea how I forgot that. But I was looking at it like, wait, what version am I actually playing here? It was time for the Eye of Cthulhu, and since 1.0.5 added buffs, I thought I may as well make some, just in case they rebalanced the Eye of Cthulhu for this build, made it super difficult to compensate. But they didn't need to buff the Eye of Cthulhu, because the biggest danger was actually myself. As you know, I played a lot of Terraria, so I went into this fight very confident with my grenades in hand, kind of forgetting the fact that if you throw a grenade right in front of you, it can almost kill you. Well, you know, it can kill you. So, unironically, I had to do the nurse cheese to survive this fight. This is classic Terraria. But we did end up winning the fight, and because I had a couple extra summons, I did a little farming as well. Now, before we did the Eater of Worlds, I wanted to gather the meteorite that landed in my corruption, mainly because of one item which I never bothered to craft back in the day. Phase blades are getting a huge rework in the next update, so I wanted to see what they're like in classic Terraria. And you know what? I actually think they're kind of cool. We also randomly got a blood moon, and the first thing I noticed is just how many vicious bunnies there are. Like, what happened to these in modern Terraria? Where'd they go? So, for the Eater of Worlds, I decided to kick it old school and fight it on the surface, and I opted for grenades. Now, it was around this point, as I was playing, I started to think about how far Terraria had come. I thought about editing this video, showing this fight, and then cutting to Legendary Mode, Eater of Worlds, Terraria 1.4.5, how stunning that would look. But even though modern Terraria looks so much better, and it plays better as well, you can't deny classic Terraria got so much right. Like, this feels like an Eater of Worlds fight. After the fight was done, I wanted to do a refight, but do it underground, because I remember when I played this version of the game, I would only ever do it on the surface. I don't think it was until after 1.1 I started to fight the Eater of Worlds underground, so I wanted to, like, tick it off my bucket list. With the resources I got, I crafted shadow armor, and it was then time to fight Skeletron. One thing that caught me off guard, though, is that the old man had some text before you could initiate the fight. I'll be real, after playing so much Terraria and never taking the time to look at the text, I actually forgot that his text is meant to give you a bit of a guiding hand on when to actually fight Skeletron. Like, he was telling me I was way too weak. At this point, Skeletron was the final boss in the game, and I do wonder, in Red's mind, was that always the case? Obviously, we got 1.1 not long after this update, but where did it end in Red's mind? I don't know, and I'd love to know the answer to that. To make it a final boss, Skeletron has quite a bit of health, so I got to work on taking out each one of his hands. And then even Skeletron's head, just on its own, it has so much health. Now, when I played the original version of Terraria in 2020, I decided that this fight would be the conclusion of my video. But I figured with this version, we had a different end goal in mind, and that was the Knight's Edge. If you didn't play the game before 1.1, let me explain. Getting the Knight's Edge was like a badge of honor. This was our zenith. But I will say, the dungeon did kind of catch me off guard. It was a lot harder than I remembered. And this is how we got the second death of our adventure. But thanks to a golden key, we could now loot the floating island, and we got a lucky horseshoe. And that's why earlier I was saying that locking floating islands until after Skeletron actually feels better. I feel like an item like this is so powerful that you have to earn it a little more than how we get it today. Going back to the dungeon though, I only had my eyes on the Muramasa. And after that, it was time to go back down to hell and start working on getting some hellstone. Now, in this version of the game, not only does hellstone turn into lava, you also need quite a lot of it if you want to make a fiery greatsword. And I think that's why the Night's Edge felt so special, because not only did you have to brave the dungeon, you also had to brave hell for about 20-30 minutes. When I got back home, I got the biggest wave of nostalgia from seeing the original design of the Clothier. And after diving back down into the caves for some obsidian and some buckets of lava, I was like, oh, I'm gonna get the red hat and I'm gonna look like my iconic character. But once again, I completely forgot that when you wear the red hat in this version, you cannot see your beard. It is so ugly. After all that though, we had enough hellstone to make the fiery greatsword. Also, why did the name change for this sword? I don't care, but why? Why did they change it? And with the fiery greatsword, I could finally survive in the jungle and get enough materials to make the blade of grass, which is quite costly compared to what it is today. And with all that, I could complete my challenge by crafting the Night's Edge, which is actually better than I remember it. It kills things in like 1 or 2 hits. Now, I did want to show the King Slime and the Goblin Army, but after an hour of waiting around, I never got either. So yeah, I'm glad they added spawners for both of those. And even though I was only planning to play a little bit that day, 7 hours went by. Now, I went into this video to answer the question, is there a reason to play this version of the game other than nostalgia? And I think there is. Don't worry though, I'm not crazy. I'm not about to tell you that a single part of this version of the game is any better than modern Terraria. It simply isn't. Terraria only gets better with its updates. I'm not, mad. But I do think you should play this version of the game to get a deeper appreciation of the very best version of Terraria at its most simplest form. Dig, fight, explore, build. That is all this version is. This would be the final version of the game before Red pulled an absolute wildcard and developed Terraria 1.1. A version of the game that says, okay, everything you've done so far, well, you're now powerless, and the world is harder, and you have to work your way through it once again. The way Terraria is currently played, you generate a world, and you spend the first half of the game exploring that world, and then in the second half of the game, you re-explore the same world, but with different enemies and different weapons and whatnot. And I should stress, I've played 3,000 hours of this game, so quite clearly, I love this part of the game as well. But replaying this version of the game really emphasized to me that if there was a real justification to make a Terraria 2, I feel like this version of the game, obviously with some quality of life changes, should be the foundation, and then wherever you spin off from here would be what Terraria 2 would be. I don't know why my mind took me to that place while playing this version of the game. Truly, I'm not a game developer. It's not something I've ever really thought of before, but I think it comes down to the fact that I was just wowed once again, and I think I might have had a similar experience when I played through 1.0 back in 2020. The very core of Terraria is just so good. It's so obvious why this game was a success. And I do think if you decide to play this version of Terraria for yourself, you will also gain a deeper appreciation for the very core of the game. But you will be wanting to play Terraria 1.4.4 afterwards. But that's about it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.